Imagine that this folder is a dimensional plane. Now, assuming that it is no height and no depth, what would this mean? It would mean that it's a one-dimensional world. So if, hypothetically, an organism was living inside of it, it would only be able to move in a linear path forward and backwards in a straight line. Now, if we go to the second dimension, we have two dimensions. We have width and we have length. So hypothetically, if an organism lived inside of here, then it would be able to move up, down, left, right, and anywhere else in between. And a two-dimensional world is comprised of an infinite series of one-dimensional worlds stacked upon each other. Just as our three-dimensional world, which has depth and length and height, is comprised of an infinite series of two-dimensional worlds. So, now that I have stacked many folders upon each other, we have three dimensions. We have depth, we have length, and we have width. Now what happens if you keep going on from here on out? We would have a four-dimensional world. But what exactly is a fourth dimension? In order to understand this, we need to understand how dimensions are perceived. We live in the three-dimensional world, but despite that, we actually view things to be two-dimensionally. Take a perfect sphere, for example. If you're looking at a sphere, it looks just like a regular two-dimensional circle. The only way that you can tell it's an actual sphere instead of a circle is because of the hues of light on it. So just like in a two-dimensional world, if a organism in the two-dimensional world was looking upon a circle, the light would make it appear to be lighter at one end and darker in the middle. Also, if an object is moving closer and farther away from you, you don't actually perceive that it's getting closer and farther away. You see that it's getting smaller or larger, and then you assume that it's getting either farther away or closer. But let's say that an object was to grow in perfect equilibrium, so that it was growing at the same speed that it was shrinking as you move it farther away. Then you would not be able to tell, without any lights or if there were details on the object, that it's moving or growing at all. You may have assumed that since we perceive things to be in two dimensions, that a two-dimensional organism would see in one dimension. So, as we're watching this rubber band expand as it moves farther away from this little organism in the two-dimensional world, it does not actually perceive anything is happening to it because it's growing at the same speed that it's moving farther away. But since we can actually see it from the three-dimensional world and perceive things to be in two dimensions, we can see things for how they actually are. The reason that the two-dimensional organism doesn't see things the way they really are is because the two-dimensional organism sees things in one dimension, just how we, three-dimensional creatures, see things in two dimensions. So in a way, we don't really see our world the way it truly is. A four-dimensional creature, however, seeing our three-dimensional world in three dimensions, would be able to see through things. Would be able to see absolutely everything, just as we could see if there was several organisms spread along a 2D environment on your floor. You would be able to see inside houses. You would be able to see inside of people. So if a two-dimensional world, a flat surface, is just made of an infinite amount of lines, then the 3D world is just made out of an infinite amount of planes. So the 4D world, logically, is made out of an infinite amount of 3D objects. Though they're not just put together like you would like building blocks. That's not how the 4D world is. That would just be 3D again. So in order to understand this, we need to understand the logical progression of mathematics in our world. Imagine that this connects piece represents the first dimension. It's simply a straight line, which is basically what the first dimension looks like. And if you add 3 more of these straight lines and connect them so that adjacent sides are perpendicular and opposite sides are parallel, then you have the basic shape of the second dimension. You have a square. Now if you keep going from here and you add it so that there's a total of 4 squares, and all adjacent sides are perpendicular and all opposite sides are parallel, then you end up with, obviously, a cube. So if you tried to keep going from here, then you would have a 4-dimensional basic shape. You would have what's called a tesseract. Now I cannot show you a tesseract, but you need to understand that It's basically 4 cubes that are within each other that have all adjacent sides perpendicular and all opposite sides parallel. Yet there are 4 lines connecting to each vertex. So a tesseract would look somewhat like this picture. Now that's not exactly what it looks like, because this is a 2-dimensional depiction, and obviously not all of the lines are straight. So I cannot show you what a tesseract actually looks like, because we cannot perceive things in the 3rd dimension. You cannot even imagine what a tesseract looks like. You cannot in your mind picture the 4th dimension or a 4th dimensional shape. And you can keep going on from the 4th dimension even. You can go to the 5th dimension, the 6th dimension, the 71st dimension. It doesn't matter. Theoretically, there are an infinite amount of spatial dimensions. The common misconception of the 4th dimension is that the 4th dimension is time. Now, while some argue that by going forward and backwards in time, if you move forward the same distance and backwards the same, then you would end up in the same place you started, just like in the 4th dimension. And while that may seem logical, if you think about it, it really doesn't make sense. If you imply that the 4th dimension is actually time, well, first of all, time is not spatial. There's a difference between space and time, quite obviously. And assuming that all dimensions are according to a pattern, then that doesn't really make sense either, because saying the 4th dimension is time, every dimension has time in it, so that would mean that the 4th dimension is special in some way, which doesn't really make any sense. Another reason this doesn't make sense is that we very slightly travel through time whenever we move due to the distance that light takes to get to our body. Now, if a group of astronauts were to get in a spaceship and they were to go very close to the speed of light, then they went around in this impossible, nearly the speed of light spaceship for a few months, and then afterwards they returned to Earth. They would find that Earth had actually progressed a few years, so they had moved forward in time by moving that quickly. Another interesting concept involving the 4th dimension is that many physicists and even mathematicians may say that the dimensions are very slightly curved, because if you really think about it, nothing can be truly absolutely infinite. So imagine that the 1st dimension, the line, is just very slightly curved, so that after a very long time it will end up creating a circle. So as suggested by many physicists, if you keep going in the same direction, then you will end up where you started after a very long amount of time, obviously. And the same thing would happen to the 2nd dimension. If it's just a square, and then you extend it very slightly in a curve, then it will eventually make a sphere, and the same thing happens in our dimension, except it will form a very slightly curved 3rd dimension, which will form a 4-dimensional universe, basically. So what this kind of means is that our 3-dimensional world is within a 4-dimensional world, and the 4-dimensional world is within a 5th-dimensional world, and so on. Now, I did say that nothing can be truly infinite, but if this is true, and a dimension is really within another dimension, within another dimension, within another dimension, then I'm implying that there's an infinite amount of dimensions, which is the only problem I really have with this theory. I'm not sure if it ever stops, or if infinity is really even possible. We don't know that. Thanks for watching my video, and I hope this gave you a better idea of what the 4th dimension is.
Howdy partners, today's video I want to talk about how to know if you are living in the 4th dimensional realm. Now, first things first, I just want to say, if you are living in the 4th dimensional realm, certain things will be happening to you, and these certain things that will be happening to you, they affect everybody differently. You see what I'm saying? So, for example, if you are living in the 4th dimensional realm, you will be able to read people's thoughts from a far away distance. Some people don't have this yet. Even if you are living through the 4th dimensional realm, some people can't read people's thoughts, you know what I'm saying? Because everybody's different, but some people can. Let's see, you will be able to see through illusions. Like, when I say see-through illusions, you will be able to tell like what's real and what's not. You know what I'm saying? Like, but this is, you know, it affects certain people. But you'll also be able to see, like, it depends like on how clear your mind is. You know what I'm saying? How clouded your thoughts is, because if your thoughts is clouded, then with this certain thing, you won't really be able to see it. But if you live through the fourth dimensional realm, you will be able to see like spiritual things. Like, for example, like if you sit in a dark room, sometimes you will be able to see like those little light entities, like the little orbs. Like, for example, right? Let's say if you like focus your eyes, or you like make your eyes do like a certain thing. And when you make your eyes do a certain thing, you see like these little clear little orbs, and they be moving around the room and stuff like that. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's one way to know if you live in the fourth dimensional realm. Those orbs, whatever you want to call them, those little, you know, clear things that you be seeing like around your eyes and stuff like that. That's seeing like through the illusion. You see what I'm saying? Because you're able to see your ancestors. You see what I'm saying? They just little orbs and stuff like that. But if you live through the fourth dimensional realm, like, it's just like you are basically like upgraded. You feel me? Like, you like your DNA has upgraded to a certain level. You know what I'm saying? Even though some people are living in the fifth dimensional realm in the mind. You know what I'm saying? Because the fifth dimensional realm is being created. Sound crazy, I know that, but the fifth dimension is being created. You know what I'm saying? You can go type in Google, the third dimension splitting from the fifth dimension splitting from the third dimension. You know what I'm saying? This stuff is actually real. It starts spiritually first, then it happens physically. See what I'm saying? So basically it's like this. When you live through the fourth dimension, telepathy, you can talk to people with your thoughts. You can send energy out your hands. You can send energy out your forehead. You know what I'm saying? You basically just like, I wouldn't say better than everybody, but when it comes to like, for example, right, everybody had their own special talent, whether you could draw, sing, you know what I'm saying, act, you know, anything that has to do with talent and art, you will be the best out of everybody in the room at whatever you are good at. You see what I'm saying? That's how you know if you live to the fourth dimensional realm. It's like your talent is enhanced. You see what I'm saying? Like, real talk. People think it's a game. So, like, in order to get to the fourth dimensional realm, you must, one, build up your light vibrations. You see what I'm saying? You must build up your light body, which is your soul. You know what I'm saying? Which is your third eye energy, which is your chi energy, which is your chakra system, whatever. You know what I'm saying? You must cleanse your chakras. Make sure they're turning clockwise, not counterclockwise. Because if your chakras is turning counterclockwise, that means they're going backwards, which means it's taking you in reverse, going to B state. And B state is nothing but anger, lust, jealousy, hate, envy, blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? But if your chakras is turning clockwise, then that means you're going with the vibrations of the earth. You feel me? Like, you can be able to feel people's feelings. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can look at somebody and like your perception just increase. You can look at somebody and be like, this is their problem. This is their problem. Or this is what's wrong with them. This is what's wrong with them. You know what I'm saying? You would be able to just tell. Like, it's weird. Like, you would know if you live through the fourth dimension. It's like everything is in sync. Everything is in sync. You know what I'm saying? When you look at something, you could tell the history of that thing. When you touch a tree, you can feel the energy of that tree. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of people don't even know that. Like, what else? Let's see. If you look at a bird or something like that, and you focus your energy on it, you can make that bird come towards you. You see what I'm saying? Just like a dog. Like, it's another way to know if you live through the fourth dimension. Like, if you walking down the street or anything, and you see like a stray dog, and it can go two ways. You see what I'm saying? If your energy is on a negative, if your energy is negative, then that dog might chase you or bite you. Or if you are with the vibrations of the earth, you would be able to telepathy that dog and tell that dog to walk beside you. People think it's a game, but that's true. And since I'm speaking on animals, basically what I'm trying to say is like this, right? If you have an animal, right? Dog, cat, ferret, you know what I'm saying, kangaroo, whatever. You could telepathy your dog. I mean, you could telepathy your animal. Everybody don't have dogs, but you could telepathy your animal. So for example, if you live on a fourth dimensional realm and you want to test to see if you're living in a fourth dimensional realm, sit next to your animal, right? And look at your dog, cat, or whatever animal you have. Look at it in the eyes, right? And while you're looking at it in the eyes, say some things in your head. But what you're saying in your head is energy and vibrations going towards that animal. And once you're looking at the animal and you saying whatever you saying in your mind, like for example, if you say like, this is what I do sometimes. Be like, you look at your dog or whatever, and you say, if you can hear what I'm saying, bark. And you keep on saying in your head, repeating in your head. But as you're repeating it in your head, you're looking into the animal's eyes. You like, in your head, you saying, if you can hear what I'm saying, bark. Or you got a cat, if you can hear what I'm saying, meow, or, you know what I'm saying, react or go crazy. And you keep saying it, and if the dog get the barking or going nuts, that means they can hear you. You see what I'm saying? That means that your energy is that powerful and that you're living through the fourth dimensional realm.
In discussing the large-scale structure of the cosmos, astronomers sometimes say that space is curved, or that the universe is finite but unbounded. Whatever are they talking about? Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland. A land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know, us flatlanders, about left-right, and we know about forward-back, but we have never heard of up-down. Let us imagine that into flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. "Hello," says the three-dimensional creature. "How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension." Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So when the three-dimensional creature first reaches flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen. And we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in flatland. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by cutting the apple. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, "For heaven's sake, what's happened to you?" And the poor square has to say, "Well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up." And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, "Well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it." And the poor square will be unable to comply. But maybe more interesting is the other direction in dimensionality. What about the fourth dimension? Now, to approach that, let's consider a cube, can imagine a cube in the following way. You take a line segment and move it at right angles to itself in equal length. That makes a square. Move that square in equal length at right angles to itself, and you have a cube. Now, this cube, we understand, casts a shadow. And that shadow we recognize. It's, ordinarily drawn in third grade classrooms as two squares with their vertices connected. Now, if we look at the shadow of a three-dimensional object in 2 dimensions, we see that, in this case, not all the lines appear equal. Not all the angles are right angles. The three-dimensional object has not been perfectly represented in its projection in 2 dimensions, but that's part of the cost of losing a dimension in the projection. Now, let's take this three-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a 4th physical dimension. Not that way, not that way, not that way, but at right angles to those 3 directions. I can't show you what direction that is, but imagine that there is a 4th physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a 4-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because I and you are trapped in 3 dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's 2 nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines. And now the real tesseract in 4 dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection. So you see, while we cannot imagine the world of 4 dimensions, we can certainly think about it perfectly well. Now, imagine a universe just like Flatland, truly 2-dimensional, and entirely flat in every direction, but with one exception. Unbeknownst to the inhabitants, their 2-dimensional universe is curved into a 3rd physical dimension, maybe into a sphere, but at any rate, into something entirely outside their experience. Locally, their universe still looks flat enough, but if one of them, much smaller and flatter than me, takes a very long walk along what seems to be a straight line, he would uncover a great mystery. Suppose he marked his starting point here and set off to explore his universe. He never turns around and he never reaches an edge. He doesn't know that his apparently flat universe is actually curved into an enormous sphere. He doesn't sense that he's walking around a globe. Why should his space be curved? Because there's so much matter in this universe that But our Flatlander doesn't know this. After a long while, you'll find he somehow returns to his starting point. There must be a 3rd dimension. Our Flatlander couldn't imagine a 3rd dimension, but he could sure deduce it. Now, increase all the dimensions in this story by 1, and you have something like the situation which many cosmologists think may actually apply to us. We are 3-dimensional creatures trapped in 3 dimensions. We imagine our universe to be flat in 3 dimensions, but maybe it's curved into a 4th. We can talk about a 4th physical dimension, but we can't experience it. No one can point to the 4th dimension. I mean, there's left, right, and there's forward, back, there's up, down, and there's some other directions simultaneously at right angles to those familiar 3 dimensions.